Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Hello, Rockstars, and welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. I'm your host, Jack McCullough, and I'm thrilled to have you here. You can follow us online at rockstarcfos.com. A big shout out to our sponsors, Plantful and the CFO Leadership Council, for making this podcast possible. Let's dive into a great episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. We have an awesome guest today. And those who listen regularly know that I don't say that every single time, so I really mean it this time. My guest is Lauren Dillard. Lauren's the CFO of LiveRamp. LiveRamp is a data connectivity platform enabling secure data sharing for targeted marketing and analytics across channels. Lauren, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Jack, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be part of this wonderful show.
We're really excited to have you. And how'd I do on my sentence description of LiveRamp?
I think you did okay. If I were to, in one sentence, describe LiveRamp, I would talk about LiveRamp as providing data collaboration software that helps B2C brands and their partners leverage data in a secure way to power and ultimately optimize personalized advertising and marketing. And I recognize that is a mouthful, and LiveRamp is not a consumer-facing brand, so probably not a household name yet, but all of the customers we work with are. And we have the privilege at LiveRamp of working with some of the biggest and most innovative companies in the world.
Yeah, I've noticed you have a customer list that people would kill for. Congratulations on that. And I actually, in preparing for this, I actually went to ChatGPT and asked them to give me a one-sentence description of your company. So if I got it wrong, don't blame me. Blame those smart people at OpenAI. So, no, that's great. So we'll definitely come back to LiveRamp because I think it's a fantastic story, Lauren. But before we get into that, I'd like to, chat about you a little bit. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the Bay Area of San Francisco by about 40 miles, a small town called Lafayette. And I grew up in a big family of 4 kids. I was the oldest of 4, and I never ventured too far away from the Bay Area. So I went to college in the South Bay, lived down there for a handful of years, and then made my way back up to San Francisco.
Okay, cool. I sort of did similar things with Boston. Grew up in the Boston suburbs, and I never really left. So I can certainly relate to that. Great part of the country where I live, right? So
totally.
So you were the oldest of 5, you said?
Oldest of 4.
Oldest of 4. Sorry. Okay, my bad.
Yep.
So yeah, interesting. We'll chat a little about that because I know you have, by modern standards, a big family now as well. But so I'm curious. You obviously made a great career decision when you were 17 or however old you were and entered college by studying business. But what was it about business and maybe finance and accounting that you thought, hey, this might be a great way to make a living?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a family of accountants. So my father was an accountant. He worked at Deloitte and Touche at the time for his entire career. He had a 40-year career there, doing a lot of different things, everything from running their audit practice to, in his later years, running their corporate development and strategy function. And his father, my granddad, was also an accountant. So it was just something I had some familiarity with. I graduated college in 2008, so job security was certainly top of mind for me, and I felt like accounting was a really really good launch pad for anything I wanted to do in finance later on.
Oh, that makes sense. It's interesting how many of the people that I've interviewed have parents that were in the profession before. So what was your first job ever? I don't mean your first professional job, but maybe as a teenager.
Yeah. So my first job ever was as a basketball referee.
Oh boy.
My parents were super involved in our school and our school's athletic program growing up. They were athletic directors, and they ran the refereeing program for CYO basketball. And so I think I was 13 or 14, kind of thrown in a referee jersey, given a whistle, and told to kind of pitch in where I could. But it was great. I made 15, $16, which at the time, per game, which at the time was a big deal. It kept me close to basketball, which is a sport I love and played growing up, and that was really nice too. I think
Cool.
my first payroll job, like actual job, was as a seasonal worker for the Gap when I was home for the holidays my freshman year of college. And talk about low person on the totem pole. I was, the one in at 4 a.m. I remember this. My dad would drive me in, drop me off on his way to work. And I did all of the stocking and organizing ahead of the store opening at 10 a.m. So definitely a lesson in work ethic.
Yeah, those types of jobs, they teach you work ethic and humility and all those other things. They also teach you to be kind to junior employees when you're the senior as well.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't work at the Gap, but I had similar retail and fast food types of jobs, and they just give me a lot of empathy to this. So cool. Well, interesting. So you mentioned basketball. Did you played in high school, or did you play in college as well, or?
Yeah, I played throughout high school very competitively. Was recruited to play in college for a couple of reasons outside of my control. I didn't end up having a full college career, but yeah, basketball again. My dad was both an accountant and a basketball player, and so was his father. And we grew up in a household of athletes and competitors, and sports was front and center. It's how I spent my weekends and time after school, and some of my favorite memories growing up were those that revolved around sports.
Were your siblings athletic as well then?
They were, yeah, they were. And my sister, who is closest in age to me, she is 15 months younger. My dad coached our basketball teams through the eighth grade, and instead of coaching two, he always had my sister play up on our team. So I got to play with her, I guess, my entire basketball career, because she and I played on the same team in high school as well.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was a decent enough athlete, nothing special, but I had my younger sister was a really good athlete. And like to this day, and we're 60 and 50, she's going to kill me if she hears this and knows I just revealed her age. But, I say the reason she was a good athlete was because of me, because I was 5 years older than her, so I was a lot better than
Yeah.
her, of course. I just wouldn't let her win.
Yeah.
I just would not let her be. It wasn't being mean. I just didn't see the point of letting her win, right? And
Totally.
yeah, and because of that, by the time she got to high school, she was she was like an animal.
Really good. Yeah.
Yeah, she
I
was.
can
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah, she was. Playing against a guy 5 years older than her. And by the way, my friends didn't let her win either. 'Cause by the time we were like 22, 23, and she was 18, it might have been flipped a little bit as whether or not she would be letting me win. She was good enough to play in college, and I was good enough to
Okay.
not play to almost play in high school. There's a little
Okay.
talent difference
So it
there.
caught up. It
Yeah,
caught up.
yeah, she doesn't rub it in at this point. At least not around me. But anyway, so that's great, Lauren. You had a great experience in college, studied accounting at a great program. Tell us a little about your career journey after that.
Yeah, I love this question, especially because my path to CFO is somewhat unusual, and certainly not the path that I imagine many of the folks you speak to take. As you mentioned, I graduated from Santa Clara University with a degree in accounting. I spent a couple of years in public accounting at Ernst & Young right after school, earned my CPA, and then transitioned into a corporate finance position at a startup at the time in kind of the clean tech, clean networking space called Silver Spring Networks. And I joined as an entry-level financial analyst. So certainly, again, low person on the totem pole, but was fortunate to work with a really incredible group of finance professionals. I think about the folks that led the finance function at that time, and almost every single one of them is now a sitting CFO. So got to work with a great group. And given, the stage of the company at the time, it was a crash course in preparing for an IPO, public company readiness. And in doing all of that, I got the opportunity to work really closely with the company's head of investor relations at the time, a woman named Trisha Googler. And I absolutely loved the work. For me, it was this wonderful marriage of finance and accounting, but also storytelling and communications and marketing and relationship building. And, I knew pretty quickly it was something I wanted to spend more time doing. I left Silver Spring. I spent a couple of years at a strategic communications advisory firm in its investor relations practice before leaving to rejoin some of my previous Silver Spring finance team at a company called Axiom. And Axiom is LiveRamp's predecessor. LiveRamp spun out of Axiom about 5 years ago. And I've spent the last decade plus here. And while I initially joined to run investor relations, I've worn many different hats during my tenure. And from that standpoint, I would almost describe my role here as being a bit of a utility player, which in hindsight, probably tracks pretty closely with my upbringing and background. I'd mentioned being a competitive athlete growing up, playing basketball. And I think even in my basketball days, I probably would have been described as a utility player. I was never tall enough to play center, but could play any of the other guard or forward positions, depending on the need or depending on the opponent. So really anything I could do to help the team win, I really jumped. And the same has been true at LiveRamp. During my time here, there have been certain roles that needed to be filled. And because of my interest, curiosity, my desire to be a team player, I've really jumped at and taken advantage of those opportunities. And they may not have been the most obvious based on my skill set at the time. So during my time here, I've run IR, FP&A, field operations. I spent 3 years as our chief communications officer, so overseeing all elements of our communications strategy and program, everything from public relations to analyst relations to community relations, internal communications. And I spent a brief stint, less than a year, as our chief marketing officer while we were recruiting to fill the role permanently. And while unconventional, would not have traded these opportunities for anything. The communications work, I think, helped me kind of hone my storytelling, learn to influence through communication. I think it helps me today better communicate with our shareholders. And marketing kind of reinforced my desire to be a really customer-focused, customer-centric leader. And this is something that I've tried to extend into how I manage our finance teams. All of the experiences I've had have allowed me to have a much greater impact on the organization, and I think have allowed me to better support the organization in a CFO capacity. And I've been in my current role for about 1.5 years.
Yeah, by the way, thanks a lot. You took my next 3 questions. I was interested in that, to your point about having an unconventional career path. And I love the fact that you were the first one to bring up a sports metaphor of a utility player, because I often get criticized. I can't go 3 minutes without making a Boston sports. But you beat me to the sports thing. But I was curious because we've probably had about 40 or 50 guests, and you're the first person that ever came from a marketing role. And I know it wasn't your career thing, but you did it for close to a year, if I'm remembering correctly. And it was, I'm guessing, it was meant to be several weeks and ended up being several months or something. But
that's exactly right.
But I am curious, and you touched on it a little bit. How did something like that make you like a better financial? And, do you think having better interaction with the product, with the customers, with the sales team, is that a good thing for a CFO to expose himself or herself to?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it is critical for a CFO to expose themselves to that. I mean, I think about, at the end of my career, what I'd want to be known as a CFO. And for me, it's always been somebody who has a really customer-centric approach. And I think this is something that, in a marketing seat, I had to spend a lot of time on. And having run IR, I think you know the product in great detail, and you understand the customer challenges it's solving for. But in a marketing role, you really kind of have to put yourself in the mind of our customers. And so that experience was invaluable to me, and I think it has sort of shaped how sitting here today, finance is able to influence some of the go-to-market motions that support customer retention, or that that influence sales compensation. So how we motivate our sellers, that influence kind of our ability to better service our sellers through our services and support functions. So yeah, a lot of things that I picked up in that marketing seat and communications role that have been quite transferable to what I do right now.
That's interesting, because like I'm the generation ahead of you a little bit. So like I became a CFO for the first time because I was really good. I was a really good controller, and it was a sort of natural progression. And by the way, the farm team for CFOs still is largely controllers. But
Sure.
I think the days of straight accounting leading to being an elite CFO are probably done. I don't necessarily tell people to take a year rotation in sales or marketing or something. Although if they can, I think that's fantastic. But like a lot of times people, they're looking for mentors. And I'm like, why don't you get a VP of sales or a VP of marketing? Yeah. And, that was taught by a friend of mine. She was with Gillette at the time. It's now part of Procter & Gamble. But like, her mentor was, he ran the sales for one of their divisions. And, she made the point, she actually thought like the finance and accounting, she probably knew about as well the divisional CFO. But she's like, no, I want to get a broader skill set. I want to bring the customer focus to this. Yeah. So in many ways, you sort of made the same decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's fantastic. So I want to chat a little bit about, and you've got the background, but your relationship with Scott Howe, who's the CEO over there. So, because that's always such a fascinating thing, how a CEO and a CFO work together. A lot of people, I've even heard lately the expression deputy CEO to describe a CFO. But what is that dynamic?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually like the framing of deputy CEO, because I think increasingly CFOs are being asked to play a more strategic role. And Jack, this is, I think, something you talk a lot about with your guests than they had, a decade or 2 decades ago. I've worked with Scott for 11 years. So when I stepped into the role, he and I had a strong existing relationship. But I remember he really challenged me in those first few quarters. And he said, look, I obviously, maintaining and stewarding the financial health of our organization is a top priority, but I really want finance, and I want you specifically to drive a ton of accountability across our organization, and not just financial accountability, but accountability for the things we know we need to do to be successful as a business. And so that kind of changed, the way in which our team operated, and, the way in which he and I interact. So I think that's been pretty interesting. I think he, continues to push me to play a little bit more of a COO role, right? Back to your point about being a deputy CEO. So I think he's placed a lot of trust in me and our finance function to play a role that is outside of the typical finance swim lane.
No, that's fantastic. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense that CFOs would become the CEOs. Now, it's not right in every circumstance, obviously, but every time one of the CFOs becomes a CEO, and then just crushes it, it's just good news for our entire profession. That's why my idol is Corey Barry, who's the CEO of Best Buy. And because she was the CFO, she was like 42 or something when she got the job, and it was a Fortune 100 company. So I put aside my desire to hate her and be jealous of her to wish her well. So,
Yeah.
but when we spoke earlier this week, one thing that kind of came through to me is the pride that you take on the team around you. And I think not only the finance and accounting team, but across the entire enterprise. So I want to explore a little bit, what's your philosophy on building a team and, just creating generally, forgive the buzzword, but a high performance culture?
Yeah. Well, I was lucky. So when I stepped into the CFO role, I stepped into a really, really strong team and a team that's been working with each other for a long time. So as I mentioned, I've been here a decade. Our controller, chief accounting officer, 25 years, our head of internal audit, 40. I've worked with our head of tax at 2 companies for close to 15 years. So it's a group that has worked together for a while and who has a really solid operating rhythm. That said, we've made a few recent hires that have also been pretty successful so far. And somebody very smart once said, in any interview setting, you're interviewing for skills, abilities, or values, or some combination of the 3. And by the time I'm interviewing someone for a role on my team, I think the skills and abilities have probably largely been vetted, and so I'm focused on screening for values. And there, I think I've always tried to recruit and hire people with really strong work ethic, who have the right approach to problem solving, and really importantly, I think the ability to move quickly to solve a problem. At a former company at Silver Spring, we talked about this mentality as a kill the snake mentality.
Never heard that one.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I'll explain it because I've loved it and used it ever since. But you're walking down a path, you see a snake. You can stare at the snake. You can organize a lot of meetings to talk about what type of snake it might be and how you'd go about killing it. Or you take a shovel and you kill the snake. And it's kind of this mentality of acting with urgency and kind of jumping on problems to solve them quickly. And it's something I place a lot of value on among the folks who work on my team. The other thing is low ego. I think we're lucky. We have a group of very talented people, but a group who kind of come to work believing that they're only successful, that their functions are only successful if the business is successful. And I think back even to my basketball days, and the best teams I played on were teams that had a fairly low ego, where every person on that team was focused on the only kind of stat that mattered the next day, which is whether or not our team won or lost. And then finally, from an interview perspective, the dinner test, my former boss coined that. He said, look, you're going to be in roles where you're working long hours in kind of a war room setting with your team. And are they people that after that you want to go and have dinner with? So, do you enjoy the people that you're around and working with? So, the dinner test is oftentimes like the last piece of a screen in an interview process. So yeah, fortunate to kind of create a team who have shared these values, and I think who above all else care really deeply about the success of LiveRamp.
Strategic leadership isn't just nice to have for today's CFOs. It's a necessity. As the demands of your role evolve, staying ahead means learning from those at the top of their game. Join us at the Spring 2025 CFO Leadership Conference, where finance leaders come together to tackle today's most pressing challenges. Over 3 dynamic days, you'll experience interactive workshops, inspiring panel discussions, and unparalleled network opportunities with peers who understand your world. Hear from top-tier speakers, including CFOs from industry giants like Philo, Conagra Brands, NerdWallet, and OpenText, plus other thought leaders who are shaping the future of finance. And don't miss the Indiana Jones of the FBI as he shares unforgettable leadership lessons from his extraordinary career. Gain actionable strategies, real-world insights, and the tools to elevate your leadership and drive your organization's success. Register now at CFOLC.com to take advantage of early bird pricing. And don't forget to use the code Rockstar100 for even more savings. Let's grow, lead, and solve challenges together.
That wraps up this episode of The Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. A huge thank you to our sponsors, Plantful and the CFO Leadership Council, for their amazing support. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and visit us at rockstarcfos.com. Until next time, rock on.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.